Ethan Walker had no plans that Saturday morning. He was supposed to be buried in his usual weekend work routine coffee. Silence and blueprints spread across his apartment table. That was his comfort zone. No surprises, no risks, no attachments. But Claire had other plans. She showed up at his door wearing that soft gray sweater he always noticed and said, "Get your jacket. We're going out." Her voice carried a confidence that made refusing impossible. 15 minutes later, he was sitting in her car, watching the rain blur the edges of the world outside. Claire was humming along to the radio, tapping the steering wheel like someone who had a secret. When he asked where they were going, she only said, "You'll see." It wasn't until the car pulled into a gravel lot beside a faded blue sign that Ethan realized. Maple Grove Animal Shelter. He blinked. "You dragged me out of bed to look at dogs." She smiled, unbothered. "To meet them. There's a difference." The shelter was quiet, except for the soft patter of rain on the tin roof and the occasional bark echoing down the hallway. Inside, the smell of damp fur and disinfectant hung in the air. The volunteer at the front desk gave them a polite smile and led them toward the kennels. Ethan followed. Hands tucked in his pockets, unsure what to do with himself. He wasn't really an animal person. He'd grown up in a small apartment where pets weren't allowed. His life now was just as empty: work, home, sleep, repeat. But watching Claire move between the cages changed something. She knelt down, smiled softly at each animal, spoke in a gentle voice that made even the most anxious dog wag its tail. Ethan stood a few feet behind her, trying not to stare, but he couldn't help it. The way she knelt on the cold floor without hesitation. How she laughed when a puppy licked her wrist, it was like she belonged there. Like kindness just came naturally to her. He watched as she crouched by one cage where two dogs sat side by side. One was small, with nervous eyes that darted everywhere. The other was older, calm and steady, almost guarding the smaller one. When Claire reached her hand toward the bars, the older dog nudged the younger one forward, as if saying, "It's okay. Trust her." The volunteer beside them smiled. "Those two are a bonded pair," she explained. "We don't separate them. They've been together for years. If you take one, you have to take both." Claire turned to Ethan, her eyes bright with a look he recognized, determination mixed with something softer. "Then we take them both," she said simply. Ethan blinked. "Both. That's a lot, Claire." She just smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes love doesn't come one at a time. He didn't know what to say to that. Her words lingered in the air longer than they should have, like they meant more than what they sounded. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Completely." The volunteer handed them a clipboard. Claire signed the forms without hesitation, her handwriting quick and confident. Ethan found himself holding leashes before he even realized what was happening. The smaller dog trembled beside him, its fur damp from the rain. He crouched down, whispering softly, "Hey, it's okay. We've got you." The older dog looked up at him, tail wagging slowly, as if to say, "I'll hold you to that." As they walked out into the parking lot, the rain had eased into a mist. Claire opened the car door, letting the dogs hop inside. They curled together on the blanket she had already laid out. Ethan looked at her, half amused, half in. "You had this plan, didn't you?" She grinned. "Maybe." He leaned against the car for a moment, watching her adjust the seatbelt, her hair falling loose against her shoulders. There was something about the whole moment that didn't feel random. It felt ... right? Like he was standing at the edge of something that mattered. When they pulled out of the parking lot, Ethan glanced back at the dogs. The small one was trembling less now, leaning against its friend. Claire glanced in the rearview mirror, her smile soft. "See? They already trust you." He chuckled. "I think they trust you. Maybe. But they're going to love you too." Her words made his chest tighten for reasons he couldn't explain. He turned his head toward the window, watching the rain-soaked trees blur past as they drove through the quiet streets. Ethan thought about how strange it was, how a simple invitation had led him here. Driving home with two dogs and a woman who made the world seem a little warmer. He'd spent so long keeping things predictable, safe, unchanging. But today, for the first time in a long while, his life felt different, alive. He remembered something she'd said earlier in the car when they first arrived. "Sometimes you don't choose the ones you rescue," she'd murmured. "They choose you." At the time, he'd brushed it off as one of her poetic lines. But now, sitting there beside her, he wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe these two dogs weren't the only ones getting rescued today. When they reached her driveway, the sky was clearing, the last of the rain dripping from the branches. Claire turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, just didn't expect my day to turn out like this. Good surprises are rare," she said, opening the door. "Let's not waste this one." The dogs hopped out first, exploring the yard like they'd been waiting for this moment. The smaller ones sniffed the grass cautiously while the older one trotted around, tail wagging proudly. Claire laughed as she watched them. "See, they already think they're home." Ethan stood beside her, the cool air brushing against his face. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "Yeah," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I'm sure." Something about the way she said it made his heart skip. She wasn't just talking about the dogs anymore. There was something deeper in her tone, something unspoken. Ethan looked at the two animals, one strong, one timid. Thought about how they balanced each other. Maybe people were like that too. Maybe that was why he was here, standing beside a woman who believed in second chances. As the last bit of sunlight broke through the clouds, Claire knelt down, calling the dogs over. They ran to her instantly, tails wagging. She looked up at Ethan, smiling. "Come on," she said. "Help me bring them inside." He took a step forward, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was walking into someone else's life. He felt like he was walking home. And even though he didn't fully understand what she meant when she said, "We'll take them both," something inside him knew it wasn't just about the dogs. It was about finding the courage to open the door again. The rain hadn't stopped, but it softened into a steady rhythm against the windshield, turning the world outside into shades of silver and gray. Claire drove carefully, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the window where drops slid down like moving stars. In the back seat, the two dogs were curled up together, one sleeping soundly, the other blinking nervously every time the car bumped over a pothole. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, glancing at them through the rearview mirror. He still couldn't believe what had just happened. An hour ago, his day was supposed to be quiet and predictable. Now he was sharing a car with two rescue dogs and a woman who somehow made his whole world feel unpredictable, but in a way he didn't mind. "Not bad, right?" Claire said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was light, but there was a quiet pride in it. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not bad at all. Though I can't tell if we adopted them, or if they adopted us." She laughed, that easy, soft laugh that always seemed to settle something inside him. "That's how it works. They don't ask questions, they just decide you're theirs." The heater hummed as they drove through the quiet countryside, the world outside washed clean by rain. Ethan looked out the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. "You really do this often?" he asked. "Take in strays?" Claire's eyes stayed on the road, but her voice turned thoughtful. "Not just animals," she said quietly. He turned to her, curious. "What do you mean?" "People too," she said after a pause. "Not in a big way, just the ones life forgets for a while. You know?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He just watched her profile, the calm way she spoke, the quiet sadness that flickered behind her words. He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to push. She wasn't ready to tell that story yet. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that felt comfortable, like two people learning to breathe in the same rhythm. Soft music played on the radio, an old song about coming home, and the hum of it filled the car. Claire glanced at him, smiling slightly. "You're quiet. Just thinking," he said. "About what?" He shrugged. "How you somehow talked me into this." She grinned. "You didn't take much convincing." He laughed under his breath. "Guess not." The small dog in the back whimpered softly, and Claire reached behind her seat, gently resting her hand near it until it calmed down. Ethan watched the way her fingers moved, steady, patient, kind. "You're good with them," he said quietly. She looked over at him for a moment, then back at the road. "You're not so bad yourself. I didn't think you'd be—" He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think I'd be what?" "The kind to care," she said simply. Though her tone wasn't sharp, it was honest. He nodded slowly, not offended. "Yeah, I didn't think I was either." For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The windshield wipers swept in a steady rhythm, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Then, out of nowhere, Claire said softly, "You looked lonely when I knocked on your door this morning." Ethan's head turned toward her. The truth in her words stung, but not in a cruel way. "Maybe I was," he admitted. "Everyone gets lonely," she murmured. "Some just hide it better." The car fell quiet again, the kind of silence that carried meaning. Outside, the rain began to fade, and faint sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the wet road in gold. Claire smiled faintly, as if the light itself was a small reward for their journey. When they reached a stoplight, she turned to him suddenly and said, "Can I tell you something?" He nodded. "I come here a lot," she said. "To the shelter. I tell myself I'm just visiting, but I think I go there when I need to remember what love looks like." Her honesty caught him off guard. "You mean the animals?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Yeah, they still trust, even after being left behind. I think that's kind of beautiful." Ethan looked out the window, his chest tightening. He didn't know what to say, so he just said the truth. "You're kind of beautiful, too." Claire's eyes flicked toward him, surprised, but she didn't reply. She just smiled a quiet, knowing smile that said she heard him. The rest of the drive felt different after that. The distance between them felt smaller. The sound of the tires against the wet road, the slow rise and fall of her breath, the sleepy sighs of the dogs, it all blended into something that felt almost like peace as they entered the city limits. Ethan noticed the way the streetlights reflected off the windshield, painting Claire's face in soft gold. He wondered if she even realized how much light she carried. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked suddenly. The question came out of nowhere, and for a moment he didn't know how to answer. "All the time," he said finally, "but I wouldn't know where to begin." "Sometimes," she said softly, "you start over without realizing it." Her words lingered between them, simple but heavy. Ethan glanced at the back seat again, the two dogs asleep, leaning on each other, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe she was right. Maybe starting over didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like two strangers driving home in the rain, with two dogs who needed love just as much as they did. The rain stopped completely as they reached the edge of the neighborhood. The air looked cleaner, the trees dripping silver under the streetlights. Claire slowed down as they turned into her street, her voice breaking the quiet. "You know what I like about rain?" "What?" he asked. "It hides tears," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan turned to look at her, but she kept her eyes on the road. He wanted to ask what that meant, but something in her expression told him this wasn't the time. Some stories took trust, and trust took time as they pulled into her driveway. The dogs woke up and began wagging their tails, eager to explore. Claire parked and sighed, a mix of tired and content. "We made it," she said, turning to him with a smile. He smiled back. "You make it sound like we just crossed a continent." "Maybe we did," she said softly. "For them. And maybe for us, too." They carried the dogs inside, setting them down in the living room. The smaller one ran straight to a blanket near the couch, while the older dog curled up beside the window. Ethan stood there, unsure what to do next. He felt strangely at peace, like something in him had settled. Claire brought him a mug of tea, and they both stood by the window, watching the rain ease off completely. "Do you realize," she said after a moment, "you haven't looked at your phone in hours?" He blinked, surprised. "Guess I didn't have a reason to." She smiled. "Good. That means today mattered." He nodded, feeling her words sink in. Today did matter. More than he expected, as the last drops of rain slid off the roof. Ethan realized that what started as a simple favor a ride to an animal shelter had quietly turned into something bigger, something he couldn't name yet, but could feel deep down. And when Claire turned off the lights, saying softly, "They're home now," Ethan understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't just helping her bring the dogs home. He was finding his way there too. A week passed faster than Ethan expected. Every evening, he found himself at Claire's house, almost without planning it. It started with helping her walk the dogs after work, then staying for dinner, then not leaving until late at night. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on the couch, a blanket half covering him, and wake to the smell of coffee and the soft click of Claire's footsteps in the kitchen. He told himself it was temporary, just helping her settle the dogs in. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about the dogs anymore. Her home felt lived in, but calm. There were mismatched mugs in the cabinet, a soft blue blanket draped over the couch, hay, and plants that looked like they'd been rescued from dying and brought back to life. It was a space that carried her warmth. Ethan found comfort there in a way he hadn't felt in years. The dogs had adjusted quickly. The older one, Charlie, had become his silent shadow, following him from room to room. The smaller one, Milo, was still shy, but had started to trust him, even letting him scratch behind its ear. One evening, while Claire was making pasta, Ethan sat on the floor with both dogs beside him. Milo placed a paw on his knee, and for some reason, that small gesture hit him harder than expected. It felt like acceptance. Claire came into the living room carrying 2 plates. "I see they've chosen their favorite human," she teased, setting the food down. Ethan smiled. "I think they're just waiting to see if I'll drop something." She laughed, sitting beside him. "Maybe, but I can tell they like you." He looked at her, meeting her eyes for a second too long. "You like me too?" he asked before he could stop himself. She froze for a heartbeat, then smiled faintly. "You're not so bad, Walker." The way she said his last name, with that playful tone, made his chest tighten. They ate quietly, the rain outside tapping gently on the windows. When dinner was done, they cleaned up side by side. Everything they did together felt easy, natural. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It's just 2 people fitting into each other's routines without realizing it. Later that night, Claire poured them both a glass of wine. They sat on the couch with the dogs asleep between them, the room lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. The air felt different, heavy in a tender way. She looked thoughtful, tracing her finger along the rim of her glass. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked suddenly. Ethan leaned back, thinking. "All the time," he admitted. "But I'm not sure I know how." She nodded slowly. "I think starting over isn't always about moving somewhere new or changing everything. Sometimes it's about letting new things in." Her voice softened, almost like she was talking to herself. Ethan studied her. "You've done this before, haven't you?" The starting over part. Claire gave a small, bittersweet smile. "Yeah," she said quietly. "More times than I wanted to." He didn't ask for details, but she continued anyway, like she'd been holding the words in for too long. "I was engaged once," she said, staring at the dogs on the rug. "We had a place together, plans, all of it. Then life got hard, and he decided he didn't want hard. He wanted easy. So he left." Ethan didn't speak. He just listened, his chest tightening as she went on. "The dogs were his," she said softly. "Charlie and Milo, when he left, he didn't even take them. I couldn't let them go to strangers, so I kept them. But after a while, I had to move, and things got messy. They ended up back at the shelter while I tried to get my life together." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "When I saw them there last week, I promised myself I wouldn't walk away again." Ethan finally spoke, his tone quiet but certain. "You didn't just save them? You've saved yourself too." Claire looked at him, her eyes glistening a little under the warm light. "Maybe, but it still hurts to remember how it felt to be the one left behind." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know what that's like." She turned her head, surprised. "You?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "A few years ago, I was engaged too. Different story, same ending. She said I worked too much. Maybe she was right. I thought I was building a future for us. but she just wanted me to be present. I didn't understand until she was gone. They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was understanding. To people quietly realizing they'd both been broken by the same kind of loss. After a while, Claire whispered, I said we'd take them home, because I knew what it felt like not to have one. Her voice was soft, but the words hit deep. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. The strength it must have taken to start over, to face the place where her pain began, and still choose kindness, moved him in a way he couldn't describe without thinking. He reached out and placed his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled slightly before curling around his. Maybe. He said quietly, you were never meant to do it alone this time. Claire smiled faintly, blinking back the emotion in her eyes. And maybe neither were you. Charlie stirred beside them, letting out a sleepy sigh, and they both laughed softly. The moment eased, but the meaning stayed. Something had shifted between them, not in a rush, not in sparks or grand words, but in the quiet understanding that they were healing together. Over the next few days, things changed subtly. Ethan stopped bringing his laptop when he came over. Claire started setting an extra coffee mug on the counter every morning without thinking. They didn't talk about what was happening, but it was there in the small gestures, the comfortable silences, and the shared glances that lingered a little too long one evening. While they were watching a movie, Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. It was the simplest thing, yet it made Ethan's heart race. He didn't move. He just sat there, feeling her warmth, feeling seen for the first time in a long while as the movie played. He looked at the reflection of her face in the TV light, peaceful content, and maybe a little scared too. He realized then that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it returns quietly in the softest of ways. Later that night, when he stood to leave, Claire walked him to the door. The air between them was full of unspoken words. Thank you, she said softly. For what? He asked. For staying. He smiled. I didn't want to be anywhere else. She nodded, her eyes gentle. Good. Then, after a small pause, she added, because when I said we'd take them home, I didn't just mean the dogs. Ethan froze, his heart thudding. Before he could respond, she smiled shyly, opened the door, and whispered, Good night, Ethan. He walked to his car. The cool air sharp on his skin, but his heart felt warm. He finally understood what she meant. She hadn't just brought the dogs home that day. She'd brought him home too. Weeks passed and life quietly settled into a rhythm Ethan never knew he needed. Every morning started with Claire's laughter echoing through the kitchen, and the sound of the dog's paws tapping across the floor. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, and the sunlight always seemed softer there. What had started as small moments, a cup of tea, a walk, a shared meal, had turned into something real. Something that felt like home. Ethan wasn't sure when it happened exactly, but he'd stopped thinking of her house as her house. It had become their place. His jacket hung by the door, his mug sat beside hers on the counter. And the dogs followed him around like they'd already decided he belonged there. Claire never said it out loud, but she knew it too. One evening, they took the dogs for a walk near the lake. The air was cool and smelled faintly of pine and water. The sun was setting, streaking the sky with gold and pink. Claire walked beside him, her hair glowing in the fading light, and for a moment couldn't believe how much had changed. You know, she said softly, they've never been this calm before. Especially Milo. Ethan smiled, watching the little dog trotting happily beside them. Guess they finally feel safe. Yeah, she murmured. I think we all do. They walked in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the water lapping against the shore. Claire threw a small stick, and Charlie chased after it, splashing into the shallow edge. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. He's got more energy than both of us combined. Claire smiled. He's living like he knows he got a second chance. Ethan turned to her. We all did. She looked at him then, her expression soft but serious. You really believe that? He nodded. I do. You gave me one too. She stopped walking, her eyes searching his. The wind brushed between them, carrying the sound of rustling leaves. "You think I gave you a second chance?" He smiled faintly. "I know you did." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Ethan, that day at the shelter, when I said we'd take them home, I didn't just mean the dogs." He blinked, remembering her words from that night at her door. "I know," he said softly, but she shook her head. "No, you don't. I meant you too. I didn't know it then, but I think a part of me already decided that day that I wanted you in my life." Ethan's chest tightened. There was no dramatic music, no grand gesture, just her voice, honest and steady. Cutting straight through the quiet, he stepped closer, the gravel crunching under his shoes. "Clary," said gently, "you don't have to explain." "I know," she said, "but I want to." She looked out at the lake, her reflection shimmering beside the rippling water. "When I saw those dogs at the shelter, I realized how much I'd been holding back. I was afraid to start over again, afraid to let someone in. But then you showed up, and it was different. You didn't try to fix anything. You just stayed." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her how much that meant, but words felt too small. Instead, he just took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the breeze, but they fit perfectly in his. "You're not the only one who is scared," he said quietly. "I stopped believing in new beginnings a long time ago. But with you, it didn't feel like starting over. It felt like coming home." Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. "Home," she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Charlie barked suddenly, breaking the moment, and both of them laughed. Milo ran in circles around them, wagging his tail wildly. Claire looked down at the dogs, shaking her head. "They're happy," she said. Ethan squeezed her hand. "So am I." They stood there until the sun slipped behind the trees, painting the lake with the last traces of orange light. Then, as the sky turned blue-gray, they headed back, the dogs trotting ahead like they were leading the way home. Back at the house, Claire cooked while Ethan set the table. It had become their quiet evening ritual, music playing softly, dogs curled up nearby, the smell of dinner filling the air. When they finally sat down, everything felt peaceful. After dinner, they moved to the couch, the same spot where their story had slowly unfolded over weeks of shared silences and laughter. Claire leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how strange life is?" she asked softly. "How one small decision can change everything?" Ethan smiled. "Every day. If I hadn't gone to the shelter that morning," she started. "If you hadn't knocked on my door," he finished. She smiled against his shoulder. "Then we wouldn't be here." "Exactly," he said. "Guess fate works in mysterious ways." The dogs stirred in their sleep, and Claire reached down to gently pat Charlie's head. "You know," she said with a soft laugh, "I used to think they needed me, but maybe they were just trying to bring me back to you." Ethan chuckled. "So you're saying I owe them dinner?" She looked up at him with that familiar spark in her eyes. "Maybe just a lifetime of love." He laughed quietly, wrapping his arm around her. Deal. For a long while, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and the steady breathing of the dogs. The peace in the room felt rare, like something fragile and precious. Then Claire whispered, almost to herself, "When I said we'd take them home, I didn't think we'd end up building one." Ethan smiled, resting his forehead gently against hers. "That's the best kind, isn't it? The one you never see coming." She nodded, eyes soft. "The one you grow into without realizing." Outside, the wind had quieted, and the night was still. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, wrapping everything in silver light. It felt like the world had paused for them, two people, two dogs, and a love that had grown quietly but deeply. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Ethan caught a glimpse of the photo Claire had framed on the shelf. It was from the day they brought the dogs home, both of them laughing, soaked from the rain, the dogs pressed between them. The moment looked ordinary, but to him it meant everything. He smiled and turned toward her. She was standing by the door, her hair loose, her face lit by the warm glow of the lamp. "What?" she asked, noticing his expression. "Nothing," he said softly. Just thinking how lucky I am." She walked over, took his hand, and said, "Then we're both lucky." As the dogs settled into their beds and the night grew quiet, Ethan finally understood what home really meant. It wasn't a house or a place, it was this: the warmth, the laughter, the peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. He glanced once more at the dogs, curled together on their blanket, and then at Claire, who smiled back at him with that familiar, gentle light in her eyes. She whispered, "We took them home, remember?" He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice full of meaning. "Both of them." And deep down, he knew she was right, because love had come home that day in pairs. 2 dogs, 2 hearts. One promise that would last.